So these are some tips on editing and proofreading when you're writing a paper, more specifically a paper for a class. I find that a lot of these tips kind of work best for me. So first, both editing and proofreading are obviously essential for making quality work. They're similar in the sense that they both improve your work, but editing can happen as soon as you start writing, essentially, while proofreading helps correcting errors after you have written. So when you're editing, this can happen just as even you're writing the first draft. It has to do with the content of what you're writing. It's important that you refer to your rubric and your prompt to make sure that you are addressing all parts of the assignment while you're writing. It makes it a lot easier if you look at that first before trying to go back and change your work to fit that. And as you're editing, as you're reading and writing your paper, you can ask yourself things such as, did I answer all parts of the question? That's important. Identify what your argument is. Ask yourself, what am I trying to say here? And then determine whether or not you are accomplishing that. And are all of your paragraphs relevant to your thesis statement? That's another big one. You want to make sure that everything you're saying is relevant to the point you're trying to make to avoid any excess, language or confusing ideas. But if you can answer all of those questions and identify your thesis and what it is you're trying to accomplish in writing, then you're probably in a pretty good place. So you want to be aware of the structure of what you're writing, both overall, the whole paper, and each paragraph, the structure of those. You want to make sure that all of it is relevant to your thesis, as I said, which when you're writing your thesis statement, you want to just make sure that you're telling your reader basically what you are going to be talking about and giving them the reasons of, whatever statement or claim you are making in your paper. So that's the main point of your paper. So while you're looking at the structure, when you're looking at your paragraphs, do they all make sense together? Are the topics of each paragraph relevant to that thesis statement you've made? And is the language you're using clear and concise? When you're looking paragraph by paragraph, you might realize that you need to develop certain ideas further or cut out unnecessary or redundant ideas. It can be easy to include excess unneeded information or filler words and sentences, especially if you're unsure about what exactly it is you're trying to convey through your work. So you want all of your paragraphs to be clear and concise without taking away from your ideas in the thesis. While editing, you also want to be aware of your style and your tone. Your style is, the words you're using, your sentence structure, and your tone, and then the tone is the mood or the attitude that you are conveying in your work. The most important part with that is making sure that it's consistent throughout the work. You don't want to be, changing your tone or, dramatically changing the style in which you are writing. It'll feel, more choppy, and it'll just read more naturally if you are consistent. You can do this by writing with your audience in mind, so using language and a tone that's appropriate for who your target audience is going to be. For me, I like to just write the way that I speak, and then I go back and refine word choice or sentence structure as needed. But that may not always be appropriate depending on the assignment, so knowing your audience is important. So citations, of course, are necessary when you're quoting another work or using another person's ideas. It's important that you familiarize yourself with how to properly cite in the format that you're working with. For our English courses, it's going to be MLA format most of the time. So you want to introduce your author and their work when using direct quotes and paraphrasing. Something that works for me while I'm writing is highlighting where I need to cite a source or where I need to introduce an author and, quote their ideas, by highlighting it instead of putting in my citation as I'm writing. Sometimes I find that interrupts my thought process if I'm trying to get down an idea. So by highlighting where I'm citing every time, it makes it a lot easier to go back afterwards and just put in, my author, the source, the page number, whatever I'm including, to do it that way rather than try to get it all down while I'm writing. I think that's kind of an easier way to do it. That's what works for me. So when you're proofreading, this is what's happening after you've written. It's when you read over your work to check for errors. Usually this would be things like your spelling, your grammar, and then it's also helpful, reading it to make sure that your paper reads clearly and naturally. So there's a lot of different ways that you can proofread and do it well, and different things work for different people. I do not do all of these. I think some of them work better for me personally than others, but a few different ways you can do that is, reading your work on your own, reading it aloud. I think that's kind of the most common, usually what we think of when we think of proofreading. If you have another person who can read it, that is also helpful. Having a second set of eyes, especially after you've been looking at your own work for so long, having another person read it both on their own and then also out loud, because by reading it out loud, you're going to hear any inconsistencies in your style or tone, and you'll notice, errors that way. Other ways of looking for one error at a time. So reading it through multiple times and each time looking specifically at a different aspect. So just a simple example, if you know that you don't cite properly every time, specifically looking as you're reading for those citations, and then reading it another time and making sure your punctuation is correct or making sure your capitalization is correct. Doing one error at a time each read through can be helpful. Reading your work backwards is also, it sounds kind of silly, but you catch kind of those spelling errors or inconsistencies a little bit more because you're focused more on actually reading the words versus kind of filling in the blanks where you know what you've said. Proofreading also at a different time or in a different area than when you first wrote is a good option, because at a different time, you will have, been able to step away for a bit to kind of reset and then come back to it almost with fresh eyes. And the same goes for a different area. If you've been sitting in one spot just trying to get something done for a long time, sometimes moving or taking a break and coming back, you'll be able to more clearly point out any areas that need improvement. If possible, you can also print your work. I know UMass Lowell has printers in the libraries, so I think that's a good option for a lot of us. But printing it out and reading it as a hard copy can just be another way to look at it versus continuing to look at your screen, assuming that it's something you've written on the computer. Reviewing one paragraph at a time is a good way too, rather than trying to tackle the entire paper or essay, whatever it is you've written, rather than trying to tackle it in full. Going one at a time can help break it up a little bit too. And then I would also say not to rely on spell check. And I think that's especially true with, writing in an English class, because a lot of the time there will be, certain words or names from books that aren't, regular words that we use, so that, spell check might pick up on that and automatically change it to something you didn't mean to write. So just automatically relying on that isn't always the best option when you're writing in English. And that's even true just for, common words. Sometimes if you misspell something, it'll automatically change it to what, a variation of what you intended to say rather than what you actually meant to say. So it is important to look through on your own too, aside from just using spell check. But those are some of the things that work for me when I am editing and proofreading. a paper that I'm about to turn in. So, thank you.